That night, the blood moon hung low over the dark coastline, its crimson glow bleeding across the restless water. The waves didn't roar, they whispered, as if even the sea knew to keep silent before old taboos. The air was cold, thick with the stench of rotting fish and salt, the usual nighttime chorus of insects strangled into uneasy quiet. Only the wind moved, threading through ragged coconut palms, carrying secrets from a world no one dared name. At the edge of the village, an ancient wooden shrine stood on stilts, jutting out above the tide. Its roof sagged beneath years of salt and storm, carved with spirals and strange lidless eyes. In daylight, the shrine seemed only an abandoned relic, ignored by all except a few reckless children. But when darkness fell and the red moon spilled over its decaying tiles, no one from the village would walk the narrow path that led to the shrine, not even to retrieve a lost sandal. The villagers avoided the place as if it were an open wound that never healed. Children were warned, sternly, repeatedly, not to play near the shrine, not to let their shadows fall upon the sand beneath its wooden floorboards. But children are drawn to danger, and the warnings only grew the legend. They whispered about treasures buried beneath the sand, singing pearls, sleeping sea dragons, even tiny gold coins glinting in the moonlight. With each telling, the story grew, but one detail never changed: the tiny white stones that sparkled beneath the shrine. No one but the village elder dared speak the truth. On the rarest of nights, when the moon bled and the air was heavy with dread, he would gather the children close around the flickering lantern flame. His voice was rough with salt and years, a low rumble that seemed to echo the ancient sea. Long ago, when our ancestors built this village, the ocean was even wilder than today. That shrine, children, was made for a sea god older than any saint or spirit in your storybooks. This god, he wanted no flowers, no coins, no fish. He asked for only one thing: children's teeth, the younger and whiter, the better. The children sat wide-eyed, lips parted, peering into the shadows beyond the windows, toward the barely seen shrine swallowed by night mist. Some scoffed, but others reached up unconsciously to touch their teeth, as if checking that they were all still there. The elder's voice dropped lower. If anyone loses a tooth and does not bring it to the shrine, the sea god remembers. One day, he'll come to claim every last tooth you ever lost, one way or another. For a long moment, the waves themselves seemed to fall silent. In that hush, the lantern flame flickered, and for the first time, some of the children wondered if the stories might be more than just stories. Out there, under the moonlit shrine, the white stones seemed to glint, waiting. The village had no name on any map. Fishermen from other towns called it the place behind the rocks, or sometimes just shook their heads when asked for directions, as if the mere thought of the place was unlucky. Wooden houses leaned into each other along crooked lanes, their stilts weathered by salt and time, the air always thick with the scent of old nets and the restless hunger of the sea. Few outsiders came here, and those who did never stayed. The villagers moved quietly, eyes lowered, superstitions pressed into every gesture. There was a silent understanding that some things, certain paths, certain words, certain shadows, were never to be crossed. Gabriel, or Gab as everyone called him, was 12 the summer the moon bled red and changed everything. Gab was not like the other village children. Where they obeyed, he questioned. Where they hesitated, he moved. His hair was wild, his knees always scabbed, and his curiosity burned like a fever. His mother had died of fever years before, and his father vanished with the fishing boats one typhoon season, leaving Gab in the care of his grandmother. His grandmother, Lola Ising, was the oldest woman in the village, a small, wiry figure with skin like driftwood and eyes sharp as fishhooks. She believed in every curse and omen, and made Gab tie red threads around his wrists, paint sigils above his bed, and recite prayers before sleeping. She had seen too much to ever laugh at the old stories. Their house stood closest to the path that led to the shrine. Gab would lie awake some nights, listening to the wind whistling through the floorboards, imagining voices beneath the shrine. Lola Ising forbade him from going near it, especially on nights when the tide was high and the wind howled with the sound of grinding shells. But Gab was drawn to that place, as if something ancient and restless called him by name. Sometimes at low tide, he would walk along the shore, peering at the shrine's stilts rising out of the sand and the pale, glinting stones beneath it. Once he thought he saw movement down there, something scurrying, or maybe only the play of moonlight on bone-white shells. The village itself was a patchwork of secrets. Some houses had empty windows that no one looked through. Some doors were never opened, even in the hottest months. The elders spoke little, except to warn of omens, a dying bird, a crack in the ground, the wrong kind of dream. But the children knew fear as only children do, sharp and full of shadows, and easily chased away by daylight. They played on the beach, chased crabs, wove stories of monsters and heroes. Yet even the bravest among them dared not go under the shrine. The stories about the teeth were always told in whispers, and only when no adult could hear. One afternoon, after a morning spent helping Lola Ising gut fish and mend nets, Gab sat alone by the path to the shrine. The tide was low, the air shimmering with heat. He watched as the sun painted strange patterns on the sand, and a salty breeze rattled the palm fronds. The other children called for him to join their games, but Gab only watched the shadows beneath the shrine, waiting for something, he didn't know what, to move. He fingered the small tooth in his pocket, a baby molar he had lost weeks before. Lola Ising said to bury it at the foot of the old mango tree, but Gab couldn't bear to let it go. He wondered, if he buried it beneath the shrine, would the sea god really notice? Or would something even older finally awake? The day the whispers started, the sky was low and heavy with the promise of rain. Clouds gathered above the restless sea, and the world felt smaller, hemmed in by water, wind, and secrets. Gab wandered the shoreline alone, his bare feet sinking into the wet sand as he made his way toward the shrine. Even in daylight, the place felt different. Shadows pooled under the wooden platform, and the sun's rays struggled to reach the sand beneath. Gab stood a few yards away, heart thudding, trying to see what the older children claimed they had seen. The glint of white stones, sparkling even when the light was thin. But these weren't stones, not really. As Gab crouched low, peering into the gloom, he realized the white shapes seemed to form patterns, rows and clusters, as if someone had laid them out by hand. His eyes narrowed. He picked up a stick and tossed it beneath the shrine. It landed with a soft clatter, stirring a cloud of flies from the shadows. The flies buzzed angrily, then settled again, circling the same patch of sand where the white glints lay. Gab swallowed, a strange chill sliding down his spine. He looked left and right. No one was watching. He stepped closer, the old wood creaking under his weight, and crouched at the edge where the sand was darkest. As he dug his fingers into the earth, a shock ran through him, cold, electric, almost painful. He nearly pulled back, but curiosity pinned him in place. The sand here was softer, almost silty, as if the sea itself had sifted and rearranged it. Gab dug deeper, letting the grains slip through his fingers. Then, his hand closed on something hard and smooth. He drew it out, a small, pearly white object, warm from the earth. For a moment, he thought it was a shell, but as he brushed away the sand, his breath caught in his throat. It was a tooth. Not a shell, not a stone, a tiny, perfect human tooth, gleaming like new porcelain. He turned it over in his palm, feeling its weight. There was something both innocent and wrong about it, like a lost button from a child's shirt. He looked back at the patch of white beneath the shrine and realized with growing dread that the sand was full of these teeth, hundreds, maybe thousands, scattered like the aftermath of some secret ancient ritual. He pressed the tooth to his lips, just for a moment, feeling the smoothness. Was this what the sea god wanted? Did the old stories have teeth of their own, sharp and real beneath all the warnings? A sudden breeze stirred, carrying a salty, bitter scent. Gab felt the hair on his arms stand up. Somewhere, faintly, he thought he heard a whisper, a giggle, high and breathless, rising from the sand. He shivered, backing away, the tooth clenched tight in his fist. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, just a story, just a shell, just the wind. But as he walked home that evening, the tooth in his pocket seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And for the first time, Gab wondered if he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Gab couldn't stop thinking about the tooth. All through the evening, as the sky darkened and thunder rumbled over the sea, he kept rolling it between his fingers, feeling its smooth edges and the sharp, hollow root. Even Lola Issing's worried prayers and the clatter of supper couldn't drown out the weight of it in his pocket. He told himself it was just a curiosity, just a bit of old bone, nothing more. But that night, Gab dreamed of the shrine. He saw it floating on the tide, larger than life, its stilts stretching down into endless water. The sand below glowed with a cold, white light, and everywhere tiny teeth sprouted like strange, fragile flowers. The wind howled through the open windows, carrying a chorus of high, chattering voices. "Come closer, bring us home." When Gab tried to run, the sand sucked him in, cold and wet, up to his knees. The teeth opened like tiny mouths, all whispering his name. He woke before dawn, heart pounding. Rain pattered against the roof. Lola Issing was already up, mumbling over her beads, eyes hollow with worry. Gab avoided her gaze, wolfed down his breakfast, and slipped out before she could ask where he was going. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and heavy. The path to the shrine was slick with mud, palm leaves weighed down by raindrops. Gab hesitated at the edge of the boardwalk, listening for footsteps or voices, but the village was still asleep. Only the sea was awake, its waves dragging hungrily at the shore. He knelt beneath the shrine, fingers trembling, and pushed the wet sand aside. The earth felt colder here, almost alive. Gab's nails broke on pebbles and splinters, but he kept digging, driven by a need he couldn't name. Soon he uncovered more teeth. Some were small and round, like baby teeth. Others were larger, their roots gnawed and blackened. Some were strung together by old bits of thread or hair. Each one he lifted seemed to shudder in his hand, as if a faint pulse ran through them. Gab worked faster, a fever burning in his chest. He forgot about fear, forgot about the warnings, lost himself in the thrill of discovery. The pile of teeth grew beside him, glistening in the pale morning light. Suddenly the sand shifted beneath his knees. A hollow opened up, a cavity packed tight with teeth. They poured out in a wave, clicking and rolling, filling the air with the sound of tiny bones knocking together. Gab recoiled, his hands scraped and bleeding, but he couldn't look away. The teeth seemed to laugh, softly at first, then louder, the sound rising like a swarm of insects. Gab scrambled back, clutching a handful, heart pounding against his ribs. The laughter echoed in his skull, vibrating through his bones. He stood breathless, the morning sun burning through the clouds. In his fist, the teeth were warm and wet with blood, as if they had only just been pulled. For a long moment, Gab stared at the hollow beneath the shrine. The sand had settled, but he could still see the shape shifting, still hear the faint, greedy laughter. He knew with a cold certainty that he should put the teeth back, cover them up, run home and never return. But the tooth in his pocket throbbed with a hunger that matched his own. And when Gab finally turned to leave, the first gulls crying overhead, he carried with him not just one tooth, but a dozen, hidden in the folds of his shirt. He told himself he'd return them tomorrow. But by the time he reached his door, Gab had already decided to keep them for luck, for proof, for reasons he couldn't say even to himself. Behind him, the shrine creaked in the wind, and something beneath the sand began to stir. Gab could not sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the heap of teeth spilling from the sand, their pale crowns gleaming in the moonlight, their roots black with rot and old secrets. When he did manage to drift off, it was only to jolt awake, heart racing, convinced he'd heard a faint clattering from beneath his bed. He kept the teeth hidden in a cloth pouch under his pillow. At first, they felt like talismans, proof of courage, or maybe protection against whatever haunted the shrine. But the longer he held on to them, the heavier they seemed, as if the pouch was filling with pebbles or wet clay. The dreams grew worse. Each night, Gab wandered a beach made of bone-white sand, the sea a gaping mouth, its waves lined with rows of teeth. In these dreams, he would stumble and fall, and the sand would open beneath him, swallowing him whole. When he woke, he bit down so hard on his tongue he tasted blood. Strange things began happening in the house. The wind rattled the shutters, even on calm nights. The shadows in the corners seemed to shiver and twitch. Gab's grandmother muttered more prayers than ever before, glancing at him with eyes full of suspicion and fear. Sometimes, in the dead of night, Gab heard what sounded like whispering, tiny voices giggling and sighing, too quick to understand, but impossible to ignore. One evening, as he lay in bed turning the pouch over in his hands, he noticed something odd. The teeth inside were no longer still. They pressed against the fabric, rolling and shifting as if trying to escape. Gab froze. He held the pouch to his ear. A faint clicking came from within, a dry, insectile chatter, barely louder than the scratching of a beetle in the walls. Gab sat up, every muscle in his body rigid. He wanted to throw the pouch away, to run to Lola Ising and confess everything, but something held him back. The urge to keep the teeth, to hoard them, to hide them, felt stronger than his fear. He tucked the pouch deep beneath his mattress, wrapped his arms around his knees, and rocked back and forth until exhaustion finally claimed him. That night, he dreamed of laughter rising from the waves. A host of tiny mouths called his name. In the dream, he put his hand to his mouth and felt his own teeth wriggling loose, eager to leap out and join the chorus beneath the shrine. When he awoke, the pillow beneath his head was damp with sweat and, faintly, stained with blood. He did not tell his grandmother. He did not return the teeth to the shrine. The hunger had already taken root. Outside, in the darkness, something beneath the sand began to smile. Gab started to notice the laughter first in the waves. He'd always loved the sound of the tide at night, the rolling hush that cradled the village to sleep, the gentle slap of water against the stilts. But now the waves sounded wrong. When Gab walked the shoreline alone, he heard a new sound woven into the surf, a high, tinkling laughter, like dozens of children giggling in secret. The more he listened, the more he realized it was never quite gone. Even on windless days, even at low tide, even in the hush before dawn, the laughter was always there, hidden just beneath the familiar voice of the sea. At first, Gab tried to ignore it, but soon the laughter followed him home. It slipped in through the cracks in the windows and curled around his pillow at night. Sometimes, when he was nearly asleep, he'd feel a gentle pressure at his ears, as if something small and cold was whispering secrets only he could hear. The hunger grew worse. Gab found himself chewing on everything: pencil ends, his shirt cuffs, even tiny bits of driftwood he plucked from the beach. His teeth ached constantly, and his gums bled when he brushed, but still the urge to gnaw and bite would not leave him. More than once, he woke with splinters in his mouth and the taste of salt on his tongue. Lola Ising noticed the change. She watched him with deepening suspicion, her prayers becoming more frantic, her protection rituals more desperate. She hung new talismans over the door and burned herbs in every corner. "There is something wrong in this house," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Something is following you, Anak. Something old." But Gab could not bring himself to tell her about the teeth. He grew quieter, haunted and distant. The other children teased him for the stains on his shirts and the absent way he stared at the horizon, chewing his lips raw. He hardly slept, and when he did, he woke gasping, convinced that the sound of chattering teeth was all around him. One night, as he lay awake listening to the laughter in the waves, he pressed his ear to the floorboards. The sound was clearer down there, a chorus of tiny, hungry voices, giggling, chanting his name, urging him to return to the shrine. He squeezed his eyes shut and tried to remember the warmth of his mother's hands, the comfort of his grandmother's lullabies, but the laughter only grew louder, echoing through his dreams, promising that if he would just let go, the pain would end. And all the while, the sea crept closer, gnawing at the shore, as if eager to claim him for its own. Sleep no longer brought Gab peace. Each night, as darkness thickened and the sea's breath rose through the floorboards, he braced himself for what waited in the depths of his mind. The laughter that haunted the waves now invaded his dreams, sharp, childish, impossible to silence. He dreamed of being trapped beneath the shrine, sand pressed heavy on his chest, gritty and cold, while countless tiny mouths opened beneath him, each mouth filled with teeth, biting, gnashing, grinning. Sometimes in the nightmare, Gab would feel hands pulling at him, tugging him deeper, their touch as slick and cold as eels. Other times, the dreams were quieter but no less terrifying. He would find himself standing alone on the shore at night, the shrine looming before him. The tide would rise and retreat, always leaving behind small white teeth scattered at his feet. Each time he bent to pick one up, it would begin to chatter, and a voice would hiss from the shadows, "Bring it back, bring us home." He woke from these dreams soaked in sweat, his pillow spotted with blood from where he'd bitten his own cheek or tongue. Some mornings he'd find faint teeth marks on his arms or the edge of his blanket, evidence of restless, desperate chewing in his sleep. Lola Ising grew more alarmed by the day. She saw the changes in Gab's eyes, the way he flinched at sudden noises, how he pressed his hands to his mouth whenever he thought no one was looking. She tried new prayers, lighting candles and placing bowls of salt water by his bed, but nothing seemed to help. "You must tell me, Gab," she pleaded one morning, her voice thin with worry. "What follows you from the sea? What have you brought home?" But Gab could not speak of the teeth, not even to her. The fear was too great, and the hunger too deep. He worried that if he said the words aloud, the thing in his dreams would crawl out from beneath the shrine and take him for good. One afternoon, after a day spent wandering in a fog of exhaustion, Gab returned home to find his grandmother weeping quietly over a cracked rosary. He clutched him tight, her hands trembling as she whispered an old story. "Long ago, a spirit cursed our blood. We are marked, Gab. You must never take what belongs to the sea." Gab wanted to promise her that he would obey, but the weight of the teeth beneath his bed and the longing that gnawed at his bones made the words die in his throat. That night, the whispering in his pillow grew louder. He pressed his face into the cloth, but the chattering broke through, dozens of tiny voices chanting, "Come back to us, come back, come back," until he finally drifted off, clutching the pouch of teeth to his chest. And in his dreams, the sand was alive with mouths, all waiting for him to answer. It started with the children. One by one, the village children awoke with blood on their pillows and a loose, aching tooth. At first, their mothers blamed the sweet, sticky candies sold by the peddler or the careless habits of youth. But soon, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The teeth that fell out always disappeared by morning, even when hidden under pillows or in locked drawers. No one ever found them. Sometimes the children spoke of dreams, strange ones filled with laughter and cold water, but the adults hushed them quickly, afraid to give the stories power. The adults were not spared for long. Some awoke to throbbing pain in their gums, their mouths full of salt water. Others tasted blood in their sleep, their tongues numb, their jaws aching as if gnawed from within. Everywhere, people whispered of nightmares, dark, slippery things crawling up from the sea, grinning with mouths that did not close. At first, no one dared speak the old words aloud, but the more the village suffered, the more the old warnings returned, passed from house to house in trembling voices. Lola Ising recognized the signs before anyone else. She knew the curse in her bones, the way dread clung to the salt air, how prayers seemed to sink rather than rise. She watched Gab carefully, her heart breaking at the terror in his eyes and the feverish way he chewed his lips until they bled. Late one night, after hearing Gab cry out in his sleep, Lola gathered a handful of salt and went to see the village elder. The old man, shrunken by age and fear, listened as she recited what she remembered. "Long ago, when the sea god first watched this village, the people promised him a gift for every child, a tooth freely given as thanks for safe passage and calm waters. But with time, people forgot. Some kept their children's teeth for luck, some lost them, some mocked the old ways, and so the offerings ended. But the God did not forget, and the God does not forgive." The elder wept, for he too had heard the laughter in the waves and seen his own grandchildren wake screaming, clutching their jaws. The two elders sat together in the dark, the taste of salt thick on their tongues, remembering the price of promises broken. Meanwhile, Gob's dreams grew worse. The teeth beneath his pillow pulsed with hunger, and now when he tried to leave them behind, he found himself drawn back, unable to let go. It felt as though the entire village was holding its breath, waiting for something to arrive on the next tide, a reckoning long overdue. At dawn, the shoreline was littered with tiny, fresh holes, as if dozens of hands had dug through the sand, searching for something lost. The waves crept higher, closer, licking at the stilts of the shrine. And beneath the floorboards, the chattering grew louder, eager, restless. The teeth were waking. Fear thickened the village like fog. People stopped gathering at the market and kept their doors barred at night. Mothers pressed salt into their children's pockets, and fathers nailed driftwood charms over windows and doors. But nothing could keep out the nightmares or the way teeth vanished with the morning tide. It was then that whispers began about the figure seen near the shrine, a shadow moving along the edge of the sea at dusk, tall and bent, wrapped in a ragged shawl. Sometimes it appeared at low tide, stooping in the wet sand beneath the stilts, hands glinting white as bone. Some said it was just the village elder, performing forgotten rituals. Others swore it was something else entirely, a spirit or a revenant, returned to collect what was owed. Gab first saw the figure on a moonless night as he lay awake listening to the wind and the muffled chattering beneath his floor. The figure moved slowly, almost tenderly, stooping to pick something from the sand before vanishing behind the shrine. Gab pressed his face to the window, his breath fogging the glass, heart hammering with dread and curiosity. He wanted to run out and follow the shadow, to beg the shadow to take the teeth away, but fear held him fast. The next morning, Gab found strange marks outside his house, a line of tiny holes in the earth, each one no bigger than a coin, trailing from the path to his window. At their end lay a single, spotless tooth. Gab picked it up, hand shaking, and felt an icy pulse run up his arm. The other villagers began to talk of the old stories, the ones never told to children, about the woman who had once tended the shrine. They called her Bagtit Nana, the Tooth Woman. Years ago, she was chosen as a living offering, sent out on the blood moon with a mouth full of baby teeth sewn into her lips. Her body was never found, but after that, the sea grew calm for a season, and the village prospered. Now it seemed, Bagtit Nana had returned. Children who saw the figure described a face hidden by tangled hair and a shawl spattered with salt. She moved without a sound, her feet never leaving tracks, her hands always searching. Some nights mothers woke to find their children's lost teeth arranged in neat rows by the door, each one gleaming with seawater. Gab became convinced that the figure was watching him. At dusk, he saw her silhouette framed by the shrine's rotting timbers, the pouch of teeth in her hand. Sometimes he heard her voice on the wind, a dry whisper, rasping, lonely. "Give them back. Bring them home." He tried to sleep with the teeth locked away, but their chattering haunted him, a chorus that rose with the tides. His gums ached worse than ever, and he caught himself chewing on his nails, on splinters, on anything that would quiet the need. The village elders gathered one last time to debate what to do. Some begged to revive the old rites, to offer up whatever teeth remained. Others wept, certain that no offering would satisfy a spirit so long denied. In the shadows outside, the teeth collector waited. The sea, restless and hungry, lapped higher with every passing night, and Gab, clutching his pouch of teeth stolen, knew that the time of hiding was coming to an end. The blood moon rose higher than any in memory, painting the sea with streaks of rust and shadow. That night, not a single lamp burned in the village. Doors were bolted, prayers muttered in a dozen trembling voices. Still, nothing could hold back the sense of impending disaster, the feeling that something ancient was waking, hungry and furious. The chattering beneath the shrine grew deafening, a rattling cacophony that seemed to shake the very earth. Children screamed in their sleep, their bedsheets stained with blood and salt water. Even the bravest men felt their courage wither, their gums throbbed, and some coughed up blood and loose teeth into their palms, staring in horror at what had once belonged to them. Gab, tormented by pain and guilt, tossed and turned in bed. The pouch of teeth under his pillow vibrated with manic energy, the tiny bones clacking together in a frenzy. When he closed his eyes, he saw the shrine rising from the surf, its stilts grown taller and sharper, reaching up to swallow the whole village. Suddenly, a shriek tore through the night, raw, inhuman, echoing from the direction of the shrine. Gab sat bolt upright. Outside, the wind had risen into a howl, rattling the walls, hurling sand and salt against the windows. He heard footsteps pounding down the lane, then saw neighbors stumbling into the road, faces wild with terror. "Something's in the water!" someone cried. "The sea is rising!" Gab rushed to the door, his grandmother clutching his arm, but the urge to look, to know, overpowered any warning. They joined a growing crowd at the shoreline. The tide had come in far beyond its usual mark, flooding the roots of the palm trees. And beneath the shrine, in the sickly red glow of the moon, something moved. Shapes in the water, crawling, writhing, their mouths wide and full of glistening teeth. The air reeked of iron and salt. One by one, villagers doubled over, clutching their faces as their teeth began to loosen and fall, blood dribbling from their mouths mixing with the rising tide. The children wailed, trying to spit out the pain, but the sound only grew louder, a tide of panic and agony. Through it all, Gab saw the figure of Bagtit Nana, the teeth collector, standing in the surf beneath the shrine. Her hair floated around her head like seaweed, her shawl plastered to her skin. She opened her arms, and the mouths beneath the water opened with her, their laughter sharp as broken glass. "Bring them home!" she called, her voice a wail that carried over wind and water. Gab's pouch of teeth shuddered. Against all reason, he pushed forward, fighting the crowd, stumbling toward the shrine. The sand squelched under his feet, slippery and warm. He fell once, catching himself on his hands. When he looked down, the sand was studded with teeth, hundreds of them, gleaming, wet and new. Thunder cracked above. The surf surged higher, crashing against the shrine's stilts, shaking the old wood until it seemed ready to collapse. Villagers scattered, slipping and sobbing, the taste of salt and blood filling their mouths and nostrils. Gab stood alone at the water's edge, the pouch of teeth burning in his hand. The laughter in the waves rose to a frenzy. Something ancient stared at him from beneath the water, its gaze cold and endless. And in that moment, Gab knew the only way to end the nightmare was to return what was stolen. But the sea demanded more than teeth. It hungered for a sacrifice. The night after the blood moon, the village was nearly silent. Exhaustion and dread pressed down on every house like a heavy fog. But even in the silence, a new sound began to rise, a soft, relentless grinding. At first, it was almost unnoticed, lost beneath the sigh of the wind and the restless moan of the tide. But by dawn, the chewing could be heard everywhere. Children chewed on their blankets, on driftwood and fish bones, on their own fingernails until they bled. Adults gnawed on the handles of brooms, the edges of their wooden stools, the sides of their own hands. Dogs dug at the earth, biting stones and shells with frantic energy. It was as if the whole village had been seized by a hunger that could not be satisfied,
a deep, urgent need to grind, gnaw, bite. Gab felt it worst of all. His jaw ached, his gums burned, his teeth felt too loose and too sharp at the same time. He chewed on pencils until they splintered, then on bits of coconut husk, then, when nothing else would do, on the edge of his own pillow, tasting blood and salt and fear. Each time he bit down, he felt a moment of relief, but it faded quickly, replaced by a new and greater need. Lola Issing tried everything to stop him. She tied cloth around his hands, smeared bitter herbs on everything in his room, prayed and wept and pleaded. But Gab could not stop himself. When he wasn't chewing, the voices returned, the whispering, chattering chorus louder than ever. The rest of the village fared no better. People wandered the lanes with rags in their mouths, tears streaming down their faces. The old fisherman chewed through the handle of his net, teeth snapping and eyes wild. Mothers watched helplessly as their children bit holes in their shirts, sobbing from pain and shame. No one spoke of the shrine. No one dared to look at the water, where the tide still lapped hungrily at the stilts, red with the memory of blood moonlight. At noon, Gab stumbled to the center of the village, clutching his aching jaw. The elders were gathered there, faces haggard, mouths torn and raw. The village priest tried to pray, but his words were slurred, his own tongue swollen, teeth missing. Some blamed Gab, whispering that he had brought this on them. Others blamed Lola Issing for keeping the old stories alive. But most blamed themselves for forgetting the offerings, for breaking the bargain made long before any of them were born. As the day dragged on, the compulsion grew. Some villagers chewed so desperately that their teeth snapped or fell out, leaving them shrieking and bleeding into their hands. Some collapsed in exhaustion, mouths foaming and eyes glazed. Gab, desperate for escape, pressed the pouch of teeth to his chest. He could feel the weight of the curse, the hunger that had been building for generations, gnawing at the heart of the village. He knew that something had to be done, but the urge to chew, to bite, to surrender to the ancient hunger felt stronger than any thought or prayer. The sun set behind black clouds, and the village drifted into uneasy, haunted sleep. But the chewing continued, a low, terrible music rising with the tide. And beneath the shrine, the teeth chattered louder than ever, eager for the feast to come.
That night, sleep became a battleground for the entire village. Few could rest, and those who did found no peace, only dreams that left them more exhausted and frightened than before. The air was thick with the scent of salt and blood, and the relentless, gnawing hunger. Gab's dreams were the worst. He found himself standing at the water's edge, the moon blacked out by heavy clouds. The sea before him was eerily calm, but as he watched, it began to swell, rising and falling as if something enormous moved beneath its surface. Then mouths emerged from the waves. Impossible, gaping mouths lined with rows upon rows of chattering, glistening teeth. They stretched wider than human faces, their lips raw and red with brine. The mouths called to him, a chorus of voices echoing in his head. "Give us what was promised. Give us what was lost. Bring us home." Gab tried to run, but the tide dragged him back, up to his knees in cold water. The mouths swam closer, their teeth clicking, the sound deafening. He reached into his pocket, pulling out tooth after tooth, flinging them into the sea, but it was never enough. The mouths only grew more desperate, biting at the waves, at each other, at him. He woke gasping, the taste of salt in his throat, pillow soaked with sweat. But even awake, the voices lingered,
The chewing compulsion was joined by a need to return to the shrine, a deep, aching certainty that only there could he find relief or answers or escape. Gab staggered through the day, his mind clouded by exhaustion and fear. Lola Ising watched him with sorrow and resignation in her eyes. One evening, when the village was too tired to argue, she sat Gab down by candlelight. The shadows twisted across the walls, and her voice shook as she told the truth he had always sensed but never dared ask. "There is a debt on our family, Gab. My grandmother was the last to give a child's teeth to the sea. After her, the offering stopped. The shrine waits, the god waits, and we are marked. That is why you hear them, why you feel the hunger. They are calling for you, Anak. You are the vessel for what was left undone." Gab's heart pounded. Suddenly, every moment of dread made sense. Why the dreams had always been worst for him, why he'd felt the compulsion first and deepest. He wanted to scream, to throw the pouch of teeth into the fire, but even now, even knowing the truth, he could not let them go. That night, the nightmares were shared. Across the village, people dreamed of being dragged into the sea by mouths with too many teeth, of choking on brine and bone, of giving and never being free. Even the elders wept in their sleep. When dawn came, the village awoke trembling, some with blood on their lips, others with saltwater stains on their bedsheets. The chewing had not stopped, nor the hunger, nor the whispers from the shrine. Gab knew the curse would end only when a true offering was made, and that might cost more than he could bear. The compulsion grew unbearable. Gab could no longer think straight. Every sound became the chattering of teeth, every heartbeat a drum urging him toward the old shrine. His mouth ached, his hands shook, and he felt hollowed out by hunger that food could not touch. Lola Ising watched him with tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching an old rosary in her gnarled hands. "If you go, I cannot follow," she whispered. "But you must end this, Anak. Go, but remember who you are. The sea cannot have your soul." That evening, as the sun died behind storm clouds, Gab walked the abandoned shoreline. The village was silent, except for the distant, desperate chewing. He passed houses with curtains drawn, doors bolted, everyone hiding, but no one truly safe. The path to the shrine seemed longer than ever, the planks creaking under Gab's bare feet, slippery with brine and fear. The air was cold and raw, full of the scent of rain and old blood. As Gab drew near, the sound of chattering teeth grew deafening, vibrating through the wood, the water, the very air. He stood before the shrine, clutching the pouch of teeth so tightly that his knuckles ached. His shadow stretched long and thin across the sand, joining the darkness beneath the stilts. For a moment Gab hesitated, memories of his grandmother's stories swirling in his mind, stories of bargains, of hunger, of sacrifices no one ever spoke of by daylight. A shape moved beneath the shrine. Gab blinked, and the shadow solidified into the figure of Bagtit Nana, the Tooth Woman. She hovered just above the sand, her hair drifting around her face, her eyes black and shining with ancient sorrow. In her hands she carried hundreds of tiny teeth, each one gleaming with a sickly white light. Gab stepped forward, shivering as the wind tore at his clothes and the surf crashed against the stilts. "Take them back," he whispered, voice shaking, holding out the pouch. "Please, just take them back." The tooth woman's mouth stretched impossibly wide, lips splitting to reveal dozens, no hundreds of teeth. She reached for Gab's offering. As her hand closed over the pouch, the ground trembled. All around them, the sand began to writhe and shift. Shadows poured out from beneath the shrine, shapes of children, mothers, old men, all with mouths full of missing teeth, their eyes empty and hungry. Gab felt his own teeth loosen in his gums, felt the pressure building as if the sea itself was trying to drag him down. He dropped to his knees, sobbing, while the tooth woman poured the pouch's contents into the shifting sand. The teeth disappeared instantly, swallowed by the earth, and a hush fell over the beach. But the silence was not peace. It was the sharp, waiting pause of something ancient deciding if the offering was enough. The tooth woman's shadow stretched across Gab's body. She leaned in close, her breath cold and briny on his cheek. "One more," she whispered, her voice a chorus of hungry mouths. "The debt is not paid." Behind her, the spirits pressed closer, eyes gleaming, teeth gnashing, the hunger of generations burning through the night. Gab knew with a cold certainty that he was not the last sacrifice the sea would demand. But tonight at least, he had begun to answer.
Gab knelt in the sand, breathless and shivering. The air was thick with salt and dread, the shrine looming above him like a broken jawbone against the stormy sky. The tooth woman's shadow covered him, her eyes bright with an ancient, inhuman hunger. "One more," she whispered, her many voices rasping in time with the chattering of the teeth beneath the shrine. "The debt is not paid. A true offering, a willing one." Gab stared down at his trembling hands. The pouch was empty, but the pain in his mouth remained, a throbbing, hollow ache. He pressed his tongue against his front teeth, feeling them wiggle, loose and fragile as baby teeth. Fear surged through him. Was this what the god wanted all along? Not just old bones, not the forgotten offerings of children past, but a living gift? Behind him the spirits waited, shapes of lost villagers, mouths gaping, gums raw and red. Their eyes pleaded and accused. Gab remembered Lola Isang's warning. "Remember who you are. The sea cannot have your soul." He forced himself to look up at the tooth woman. "If I give you my teeth, will you let the village go? Will you stop the hunger?" The wind howled, rattling the stilts of the shrine. The tooth woman's mouth split into an even wider grin, and she nodded, slowly, with the patience of tides. Gab reached into his mouth, his fingers slick with tears and spit. The first tooth came free easily, sliding out with a jolt of pain that left him dizzy. Then another and another, blood pooling on his tongue. He placed each one, trembling, into the sand before the spirit. With each tooth, the hunger inside him lessened, replaced by a cold emptiness. The villagers' ghosts drew closer, their mouths no longer gnashing, but murmuring a soft, hopeful chant. The air vibrated with something like relief. When Gab had given up every tooth he could bear, he fell forward, forehead pressed to the sand, exhausted and weeping. "Please," he whispered, "let it end." The tooth woman knelt beside him, gathering the fresh teeth in her long, salt-stained hands. She pressed her lips to Gab's brow, a touch as cold as the ocean at midnight. The chattering beneath the shrine slowed, then faded to a faint, satisfied clicking. The wind eased, the restless spirits began to dissolve, their mouths closing, their eyes brightening as they drifted away with the tide. The tooth woman straightened, her form flickering like mist. "The debt is paid for now," she sang, her voice both everywhere and nowhere.
but the hunger returns with every forgotten promise. As dawn broke over the water, Gab lay in the sand, his jaw aching, his mouth filled with the metallic taste of blood and salt. He had given what he could. The spirits had receded. The curse loosened for a time. But in the hollow where his teeth once were, he felt the sea's hunger, dormant, waiting, never truly gone. And as he looked up at the crumbling shrine, he understood. Bargains with the old gods are never simple and never truly over. The dawn was pale and sickly, sunlight bleeding through bruised clouds over a village that barely dared to breathe. For a moment, it seemed the terror had passed. The chattering beneath the shrine had gone quiet. The gnawing compulsion in people's jaws faded. Even the restless wind stilled, as if afraid to disturb the uneasy calm. But the sea had not forgotten. As the tide crept up the beach, it came faster than any living villager could remember, high and hungry, foaming white and red where it lapped the sand. Those who had hidden their children's teeth or mocked the old traditions felt the first icy surge flood their doorways. Salt water clawed into homes, washing away the fragile charms and prayers they'd scattered in desperation. Gab, half conscious from pain and blood loss, heard the first screams while lying in the sand beneath the shrine. He tried to stand, but the world spun and the taste of iron filled his mouth. Lola Ising called for him, her voice lost in the crash of waves and the shrieks of neighbors pulled from their beds by the rising water. In the chaos, Gab saw the Tooth Woman, her shape enormous, shadowy, rising from the swirling foam, her arms spread as if to gather the whole village to her. Faces appeared all around her, the spirits of the forgotten, the sacrificed, the children whose teeth were stolen by the sea. Their mouths opened, singing a wordless, keening song, their voices echoing in every ear. One by one, villagers fell, those who had defied the bargain, those who'd kept teeth hidden for luck, those who'd laughed at old warnings. Some stumbled into the surf, hands clutching at their bleeding mouths, eyes wild with terror as the sea claimed them. Others drowned in their own homes, salt water rising around them, dragging them into silence. Gab struggled, crawling through the sand as the tide pulled at his ankles. He reached for Lola Ising's hand, but the water ripped them apart. For a moment, his head went under. The world vanished into bubbles, salt, and roaring blackness. In that suspended moment, Gab dreamed. He tumbled through a cold, endless world, surrounded by children with mouths full of teeth, their eyes wide and sad. The Tooth Woman's voice reached him from everywhere and nowhere. "You answered, child, but the sea remembers every debt." He saw visions, offerings left at the shrine long ago, a line of children standing by the water's edge, mothers weeping, waves carrying teeth and blood out to the hungry deep. He felt himself pulled farther and farther away, the hunger that had gnawed at his soul fading as the tide carried him into darkness. When Gab awoke, it was night again. The storm had passed, and the village was a ruin. Bodies and debris littered the beach. The shrine, battered and broken, sagged above the sand but still stood, stubborn as a bone in the mouth of the sea. Gab lay on his back, weak and shivering, unsure if he was alive or something else entirely. His mouth ached with emptiness, but the terrible compulsion had left him. Overhead, the stars trembled through thinning clouds. Beside him, Lola Ising wept softly, cradling his head in her lap. The sea, at last, was quiet. But in that hush, he heard it, the faintest chattering far beneath the sand, a warning, a memory, a promise that the hunger would never be gone for good.
Gab drifted at the edge of sleep and waking, lost in a strange, weightless darkness. It was as if the world had emptied itself of all sound except for a single persistent music, a rhythm of clicking, chattering, and sighing. The sound wasn't frightening now, only sad, echoing through a vast cavern of water and bone. He saw himself standing on the sea floor, surrounded by shadows that shimmered like moonlight on scales. All around him, children and elders floated in the gloom, faces pale, mouths full of tiny white teeth. Some reached out to him, not in accusation, but in longing, their eyes brimming with sorrow and memory. The toothed woman moved among them, humming a melody woven from centuries of grief and hunger. Her song was wordless, but filled with meaning. Every debt paid with teeth is a song sung by the sea. Every broken promise becomes a voice, lost and longing beneath the tide. As she sang, the teeth in the sand began to move. They tumbled and spun, clicking in time with her tune. The song grew louder, filling Gab's head, and he realized it wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. The curse was never truly satisfied. The hunger slept, but it would wake again. Each generation, the sea would choose a new voice, a new mouth to carry the weight of forgotten bargains. Gab saw himself standing on the sea floor, surrounded by shadows that shimmered like moonlight on scales. All around him, children and elders floated in the gloom, faces pale, mouths full of tiny white teeth. Some reached out to him, not in accusation, but in longing, their eyes brimming with sorrow and memory. The toothed woman moved among them, humming a melody woven from centuries of grief and hunger. Her song was wordless, but filled with meaning. Every debt paid with teeth is a song sung by the sea. Every broken promise becomes a voice, lost and longing beneath the tide. As she sang, the teeth in the sand began to move. They tumbled and spun, clicking in time with her tune. The song grew louder, filling Gab's head, and he realized it wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. The curse was never truly satisfied. The hunger slept, but it would wake again. Each generation, the sea would choose a new voice, a new mouth to carry the weight of forgotten bargains. Gab saw flashes of futures yet to come, a child digging in the sand beneath the ruined shrine, a mother weeping over a blood-stained pillow, another night when the blood moon rose above the restless waves. He understood that he was only one in a line of many, marked, chosen, but not the last. The toothed woman knelt beside him. She touched his cheek with a finger cold as the tide. "You have done what was asked, child, but remember, when the white stones call, someone must answer. Otherwise, the sea will sing its hunger to every shore." Gab tried to speak, but his mouth was empty, the song of the teeth filling the silence. He listened, helpless, as the spirits drifted away, their voices fading into the deep. Slowly, the darkness loosened its grip. The sound of chattering grew softer, replaced by the distant hush of real waves, the whisper of Lola Ising's voice calling his name. Gab opened his eyes to a broken dawn and the smell of salt and loss. He was alive, changed, marked, but alive. He carried the song of the teeth in his bones, knowing that peace was only borrowed, and that someday another child would hear the calling from beneath the shrine. For now, the village slept, but in the wet sand, the white stones waited, shining faintly in the new light, a reminder that the sea always remembers. For days, the village remained silent, grieving, afraid, and unsure if the curse had truly passed or was simply waiting to return.
Survivors drifted through the ruins, tending to the wounded, burying the dead, and picking through what little was left of their old lives. The sea, for once, was calm, as if exhausted by its own fury. Gab spent his days resting, his body weak, but his mind crowded with memories of the shrine, the spirits, the music of the teeth. Sometimes he dreamed of water, of floating among lost children in the cold deep. Other times, he simply listened to the hush in the house, too tired to speak or move. It was on one such morning, as pale sunlight crept across the floorboards, that Lola Icing came to sit beside him. She looked older than ever, her face lined with sorrow, and her hands trembling as she folded the rosary between her fingers. For a long time she said nothing. The weight of unspoken words hung between them, heavy as a stone. Finally, her voice broke the quiet. "Gab, there are things I must tell you, things I have hidden too long out of fear and shame. You have a right to know why the sea marked us, why you, of all the children, were chosen to bear the hunger." Gab turned to her, the memory of the tooth woman's eyes fresh in his mind. Lola Icing's own gaze was steady, though wet with tears. "In my girlhood, the village was still faithful to the old ways. My grandmother told me that when a child's first tooth fell out, it was to be offered to the shrine, buried in the sand, or tied to the stilt, a small gift for the sea god who guarded us. I was proud when I lost my first tooth, but I was proudest of my brother, Ramon, who was brave and always laughed at ghosts. He lost his tooth on a night when the sea raged and the wind shook the house." She took a shaky breath, her voice low and thick with regret. "I begged Ramon not to go to the shrine. He was afraid, but I dared him, called him a coward if he would not do what was right. He left, teeth in his hand, and never came home. The next day, they found only his shirt by the water's edge, and a line of tiny footprints leading out to the tide." Gab reached for her hand, silent. "The elders said the sea god was appeased, that our debt was paid. But I never forgave myself. I swore I would keep the tradition alive, would never let another child be taken. But time wore down my courage, and others in the village stopped believing. The offering ceased, the shrine was left to rot, and the hunger grew." She looked at Gab with eyes full of love and pain. "I have carried this guilt all my life, and now you have suffered for it. I am so sorry, Anak. I am so sorry for the burden I passed to you." Gab squeezed her hand, tears sliding down his cheeks. For the first time he understood the depth of the curse, not just a supernatural hunger, but a chain of grief and guilt, passed from one generation to the next. Lola Icing pressed her forehead to his. "Promise me, Gab, that you will not carry this alone. Tell the story. Warn them. Let the next child be spared if the sea ever calls again." Gab nodded, his voice lost, but his resolve solidifying. He would not let silence and shame feed the hunger beneath the shrine. The truth would be his offering, and perhaps, someday, it would be enough. The days after the flood passed in a haze of grief and exhaustion. The village worked together to clear debris, bury the lost, and gather what little they could save from the ruins. Old wounds, resentments, regrets, secrets surfaced with every tide, yet the sense of shared survival knit the villagers closer than before. Gab moved through these days like a ghost, the spaces in his mouth raw and aching, his body thin from hunger. Yet he felt lighter, too, as if the weight of the sea's gaze had finally slipped from his shoulders. Each night he listened for the chattering beneath the sand. Each morning he searched the beach for the glint of white stones. Both were quieter now, but neither was truly gone. One evening, as the sun set red and bruised on the horizon, Gab returned alone to the battered shrine. He carried with him the last of his own baby teeth, a tiny molar kept hidden in a wooden box since before the nightmares began. It was the only tooth that had never been offered, never swallowed or lost. It was a relic of his childhood, his mother's love, and his grandmother's hope. Gab knelt in the sand, heart pounding. The air was still and heavy. The shrine loomed above him, splintered but standing, its stilts stained with salt and old blood. Gab closed his eyes and pressed the tooth into the sand beneath the shrine, whispering the words Lola Ising had once taught him, an old prayer for forgiveness and peace. The sand was cool and soft, and as he let go, he felt a gentle tremor pass through the earth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a breeze stirred, carrying the scent of the ocean and the faintest echo of voices, soft, grateful, almost at peace. Gab remained kneeling, tears drying on his cheeks. He felt the hunger inside him ebb, replaced by a dull ache and the certainty that he had done all he could. The shrine seemed to breathe with him, its old wood creaking, the chattering now no more than a memory. When he finally stood to leave, Gab looked back one last time. In the fading light, he thought he saw the tooth woman at the edge of the tide, watching him, nodding once, her face both sorrowful and proud. All around her, the shadows of lost children and villagers drifted into the water, their mouths finally closing, their eyes bright with release. Gab walked home with empty hands but a lighter heart. He knew the peace would not last forever, that the hunger beneath the shrine might return with a new moon, a new child, a new forgotten promise. But for now, he had given all he could, and for the first time in many generations, the sea was silent. Time passed, and the village slowly began to heal. The wounds left by the flood and the curse did not fade easily, but as the days grew longer and the sea grew quiet, hope returned like grass through cracks in the stone. The villagers rebuilt their homes with hands still trembling from memory, their laughter softer, their voices always tinged with caution. Some would never speak of what happened, locking away their nightmares with the missing teeth and broken charms. Others told the story over and over, warning children never to dig beneath the shrine or keep their lost teeth close to their hearts. Gab became a legend, a living ghost among the survivors. He moved quietly through the village, his mouth marked by the sacrifice he had made, his eyes carrying the wisdom and sorrow of the sea. Children watched him with a mixture of fear and awe, while elders touched his shoulder in silent thanks. Some said that Gab could speak to the spirits now, that he heard the voices in the waves and knew how to bargain with the old gods. Others claimed he was no longer fully alive, that a piece of him had been claimed by the tide forever. At night, Gab sometimes walked the shoreline, feeling the sand shift beneath his bare feet. He would pause at the water's edge, listening to the hush of the waves, half expecting to hear the chattering of teeth or the distant song of the tooth woman. But the sea, for now, only whispered ordinary secrets, stories of wind and rain, of distant storms and returning fish. Once he found a tooth washed up on the sand, gleaming in the pale dawn. He knelt, turning it over in his palm, remembering the old bargain, the hunger that would never truly vanish. He buried the tooth gently at the foot of the shrine, speaking a prayer for peace, not just for himself, but for every child and spirit
caught in the tide's ancient web. The village honored him quietly. No more offerings were forgotten, no more shrines left untended. The elders taught the children old songs again, and when a baby tooth was lost, it was brought to the sea with solemn care, a promise renewed in every generation. But legends have a way of growing. Some said that on certain nights, when the moon was red and the tide was high, you could see Gub's shadow walking among the surf, guarding the shoreline, watching for the first sign of hunger returning. And in every whispered warning, in every new offering, the village remembered, peace is never given freely, and the sea never truly forgets. Years passed. The village never quite forgot. Long after the flood, long after Gab's sacrifice had faded into legend, the old shrine still stood on its battered stilts above the tidal flats. Its wood grew softer and grayer with every passing monsoon, its carvings nearly worn smooth by wind and salt. Most days, the place was ignored, a ghost among the living, a relic everyone avoided as they went about their lives. But there were always the curious, the stubborn, and the young. On nights when the moon hung low and blood orange above the sea, some villagers swore they heard faint laughter in the waves, or saw white glints in the sand where the tide receded. The elders grew strict again, warning children with old songs and new stories. If you lose a tooth in the night, do not look for it. Let it go to the sea. The shrine remembers all that is owed. But memory is a fragile thing. One summer, a boy named Tomas, restless and bold, heard whispers from his friends about the treasures beneath the shrine. White stones that sparkled like pearls, secrets buried in the sand. He waited until the village napped in the heat of midday, and crept along the shore with a borrowed spade and his heart pounding with hope and mischief. Low tide revealed the old bones of the shrine, half buried in silt. Tomas dug where he saw something white winking in the sunlight. The sand was warm and easy to move. He uncovered a handful of smooth, pale stones and smiled until he noticed one wasn't a stone at all, but a tiny tooth still stained with the trace of old blood. A cold shiver ran through him. As he held it, the wind stilled. From beneath the shrine, deep in the shadow, a faint, unmistakable sound drifted up. The chattering of countless teeth, restless, remembering, hungry. Tomas dropped the tooth and ran, heart hammering, his footsteps scattering the white stones back into the sand. He told no one what he had seen, but that night, as the moon rose full and red, he dreamed of the sea opening wide, lined with endless rows of teeth, all waiting for what was owed. The next morning, the elders found fresh holes in the sand beneath the shrine. They gathered the children, repeating the old warning with tears in their eyes. If you lose a tooth in the night, don't look for it. It knows its way back to the shrine. And as the tide rose, the village listened for laughter in the waves, for the music of teeth, for the hunger of the sea that never truly dies.